Hey y'all, my name is Sierra, and this is how I came to the way. So, I'm originally from the DMV. That's where I met my husband. I grew up apostolic, going to church about 4 times a week. And growing up like that, I was taught ministry is like super important. It was very ministry driven. I started serving when I was 7. I served on dance ministry, hospitality. I even helped back with the kids once I got old enough. And in all the serving, I saw God. I knew God was real. We saw the manifestation of miracles, but with everything that I would go home to, it would make it hard for me to connect with God. And eventually, I started moving farther and farther away from the church. So I met my husband, we got married, and his parents had already moved to Texas. They wanted us to come out to Texas. We came out here and just started going through hell. We couldn't get along, we couldn't stay in the same space, all within 6 months of us getting married. Um, we eventually ended up separating because we just couldn't reconcile. We couldn't get along. Neither one of us wanted to be in a relationship anymore. We ended up moving back to Maryland. My husband stayed here. I took my kids back to Maryland and just kept going through hell. I got farther and farther away from God. I could not find my way back. I was struggling, depressed, suicidal, on drugs, drinking, and I was just going farther and farther down to the bottom. Being separated from my husband caused me to go into an extremely deep depression. I began abusing pills. I was drinking myself to sleep. I was cutting and abusing myself. The spirit of suicide really had its way with me for about a year and a half. I would go to sleep just thinking, I pray that I don't wake up. My fight that I had before then it had gone out. I didn't want to live. I didn't have the will to live. I felt like my kids deserved a better mother. I didn't even want to stay alive for them. I wanted them to be free of me because I felt like they shouldn't have a mother who's so depressed that she hates herself. I didn't want them to see that. I didn't want them to grow up with that, especially dealing with the things that I dealt with as a kid, having parents that went through depression as well, that also didn't like themselves. I didn't want to keep repeating the cycle. And in all of that darkness, God stayed with me. There was a time where I know for a fact, after all the pills that I took, I should have been dead. I did it on purpose, trying to commit suicide. And in the moments where I literally felt life slipping from my body, I was like, Lord, I don't want to do this. Jesus, please save me. I don't want to do this. I want to live. And I will never forget the feeling of feeling like something had scooped me up, and I had like a warm, tingly feeling all over. And I ended up falling asleep, waking up the next morning like, how am I alive? And this is all happening in the midst of going back and forth with my husband on whether or not we were gonna get a divorce or not. And while I'm dealing with that, he's also dealing with his own troubles, which led him, to take the steps to try to find God again. And all of this is happening while I'm trying to co-parent with my soon-to-be ex-husband. And while I was in Maryland going through everything that I was going through, he was here going through everything he was going through. And eventually he got to the point where he didn't know where else to turn. His hairstylist ended up telling him about the way. And I think he came for a couple services and ended up coming to Up and Out. Now, during this time that he's coming to Up and Out, I'm back home with the kids and, we're trying to co-parent, and I see such a change in him. We're having these nice conversations, it's not combative, it's not aggressive. He was just letting me go through what I was going through. If I did turn up, he wasn't responding. And I noticed it because I know this man, and I'm like, okay, something's different about him. And something about him changing made me want to change. And I began to go back to church back home. I began seeking God and really like getting on my face before him. I knew that I had to do something or I was gonna die. So God began talking to me, and he told me I had to come back to Texas. I didn't want to. I said, Lord, if you want me to come back to Texas, you got to give me 3 signs. And sure enough, within 3 days, I had 3 signs. I came to Texas, and my first thing was, I want to see this church you're going to. My husband had completely made a full turnaround change. And I wanted to know where that change came from. So I actually ended up coming for my son's birthday just to visit. And when I visited, he brought me to church with him. And this man gets up on stage. Praise and worship was awesome. I'm a big praiser and worshiper. So I was like, okay, they got a little jump. I like this. Okay, get my little shout in. And then this man gets up on stage and starts preaching like nobody I have ever heard preach before. No lie. I will never forget this. He was preaching on sanctification. And it was exactly what the Lord had been telling me I needed to do. I needed to go back through that process of purification and starting back in my first love and letting him purify and clean me all over again. Everything that God had been talking to me about, this man was saying. And the kicker was he got up and started telling his story. Of course, he, by that time had been telling it, but I was shocked. I had never heard someone get into the pulpit and talk about the things that they have gone through, especially homosexuality and molestation. With me going through that in my childhood and being in church and feeling like nobody else around me is going through this, I feel alone. And if they are going through it, they're not talking about it. Definitely not in the pulpit. So seeing this person in the pulpit talking about their story without any shame, talking about how they're on the other side of it, it planted a seed of hope in me. And it was something that I needed. So I got through service. I was done. I was through. By the time it was time for us to go, we did the benediction. I was like, I want to come back here. Not even getting out the parking lot yet. I was like, I wanna come back and see if it's like this again. And on my way out, people were giving me hugs. Of course, they didn't know my husband. So they were excited to meet me, and they were hugging me and, talking to me. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay, they don't even know me. And it gave me such a warm feeling of safety. Just on the first time I had came, I kept feeling the word safe come up in my spirit. So I left. I ended up going back home to the DMV. I was still working, so I was trying to figure out, like, Lord, I know you want me to move here. How am I going to make this work? Still kind of resisting, but I couldn't help the fact that this church kept coming up on my mind. And I'm like, well, now I see why he's made this big change the way he has. And I want that too. So I ended up only staying home for about a week, and I came right back. And I told him, I was like, I want to go back to that church. I want to keep going. I want to see if it's like this all the time. And sure enough, every single time I came, it was something for me here. God knew exactly when to send him, when to send me, and it all ended up working out for our growth and for our favor. every single series from the time that I got here was meant exactly for me. I don't know who else it was meant for, but I know that it was meant for me. And since then, it's gone up. You know, God has healed and restored our marriage. You know, we just celebrated 5 years of marriage. Our kids feel so at home here. You would think that they just walked into their living room. My son, who deals with autism, I've never seen him open up so much to people that aren't biologically related to him. And some of the relationships he's had here have been even stronger than the relationships he has with our own family. And I can only praise and thank God that he brought us here to be under leaders that not only have gone through the things that we've gone through, but are called and chosen by God, and listen to them and obey him and walk exactly what they preach. So that's my story. I can't wait until you come and you can develop your own story. And I can't wait to save you a seat.